The Louie T Network is powered by MusicHead University. MusicHeads, classes in session. Turn me up. Enroll on YouTube now. Link is in the description.
Who else could it be but me, your man, Louie T? Welcome to the Command Post Live. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. I, of course, am your Commander-in-Chief, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. So we're continuing to follow Phase 3 of the OTAs. Last week, had an open session to the media. We heard from head coach Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury, quarterback Jaden Daniels, among others. We figured the same thing would happen this week, and that did happen today. Open session to the media. The Commanders media team was out there, so we got a command center from the practice. I watched the entirety of that. I'm pretty sure most of you did as well. So there's some things that I was able to pick up on that we can talk about today. We've, taken bits and pieces of some clips others have put up on social media. I'm pretty sure you've been scouring social media as well to kind of see some different things, to try to piece some things together. Again, it's the off season. We're nerds. We obsess over this probably way more than we should. This is actually a very unhealthy habit that we have, but it's our habit. Leave us alone. So with that said, we heard from Joe Witt Jr. And I told you yesterday, I thought we would hear from him because we got Cliff last week. So it's only natural that you get the defensive coordinator this week. We heard from Dan Quinn, which is why I pushed this back 15 minutes, because I wanted to listen to his press conference and take that in. We may hear from some other players at the podium. If so, I'll do a separate video detailing that, or we'll just talk about it later on tonight with the Commanders Kings. But what I wanted to do was really get into this Joe Witt press conference, which was extreme. I love Joe Witt because Joe Witt Jr., it mixes no words, right? And he says what he means what he says, and he's straight to the point. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. He doesn't bullshit you, which I think could be said for this entire staff. He's just more, to me, in your face about it, right? He's more demonstrative and direct, whereas DQ's got a sense of humor. Not that Joe Witt Jr. doesn't. You just don't see a lot of it at his press conferences. DQ's kind of diplomatic in a way where he can answer a question, dance around it, but still make you feel like he gave you enough to walk away with and write your little article that you're working on, right? And DQ's very personable, all that good stuff. He wants to make you laugh, has a sense of humor. Joe Witt's like, hey, next question. What's up? Talk to me, right? Like, love Joe Witt, and he's going to give you the reels. So, and he did that. And so we got a lot to really talk about with what he said. But before we get to what he said or what DQ said at his press conference, let's talk about the actual on the field observations. And again, there's not a lot. I told you I'm more inclined to talk about what was said before and after these OTA practices than I am to talk to you about what actually happened on the field, because there's no pads. They're running around. They're getting into shape. They're working on some of the fundamentals, stuff that needs to happen, obviously, but there's no real competition. So I'm more so inclined to talk about what these guys have seen, what they're saying, because that's more important. But a few observations from the continued phase, as they're getting towards the end of Phase 3. One more day of Phase 3, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, this goes out until the 6th. So today's the 4th. So 2 more days of Phase 3, and then we'll be into mini camps, right? Mandatory minis next week, which we expect to see everybody there. Maybe not Terry, we'll see. But we definitely expect to see Marshawn Lattimore and Laramie Tunzel, who were not in attendance once again, along with Terry McLaurin. Someone else who was whose absence was noticeable was Michael Gallup. And I'm watching the practice. I'm watching the coverage on the Commanders YouTube channel, and they're showing the wide receivers going through the drills. And what was crazy is oh man, why am I blanking on his name? My man that does the interviews and is sort of the lead man when it comes to Commanders content. He was talking about Terry at like he was there, and Santana was like, I don't think he's there, right? So, which he wasn't, right? Santana was like, I don't know if he's here or not, but you know, business comes first. And then he mentioned Michael Gallup, and he was like, if you could put the camera on Michael Gallup, and there was no Michael Gallup. But even then, you didn't know Michael Gallup wasn't there. He's talking about Michael Gallup. Brian Colbert, thank you. Brian Colbert, who does a really fantastic job, by the way. I think he does a tremendous job kind of juggling a lot of different things and wearing a number of different hats and engaging with the players and his colleagues. I think he does a really good job. But he definitely thought that Terry and Michael Gallup were there. And Santana was like, I don't think Terry's here. And then he got word that he wasn't. And then he was like, you know, put the camera on Michael Gallup. And they couldn't find him. Like, the cameraman's kind of scanning and couldn't find him. But then it was confirmed for me because when he first said it, they were stretching. So you know, he could have been anywhere in the stretch line. You know, so it wasn't like, okay, he's not out there. It wasn't until they got to the wide receiver drills when they broke into their groups, right? You always hear me talk about indies, right? Individual groups. So it wasn't until they broke into their indies where you see all of these receivers, and we know Michael Gallup is number 12, and I'm scanning and I'm scanning and I'm scanning and I'm scanning and I'm watching them go through the drills, and I've seen them go through the drills now twice, and they've cycled through, and I haven't seen 12 not once, and I'm like, where the hell is Michael Gallup at? I mean, and it could have been something as simple as he had to use the bathroom, right? So I'm like, well, maybe he's just not out there right now, but he's out there. And then I think I saw Nicky Javala say that he was in the building today, but he did not practice. So, you know, it could be a number of different things. I'm not going to make a big deal out of it, but for someone, and again, for someone who I believe is on the outside looking in, he needs every bit of work, every rep. This guy didn't play football last year. He needs every single rep he can get. Now, again, the advantage that Michael Gallup has is that the staff knows him. The guys that matter know him. Dan Quinn, Joe Witt Jr., people of that ilk, they know him. They know his work. They were with him in Dallas, so they know his work ethic. They know what he's capable of. And so he does have that leg to stand on. But that was 3-4 years ago, right? We're dealing in present day now. What can you do for me now? I told you this is a Janet Jackson league. What have you done for me lately? Doom, 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 doom. Ooh, yeah. That was for your dog, Door Gunner. Hopefully he heard it and he went nuts. See, we two can play that game. You want to keep calling me out for being late? I'm going to start making your dog sing at the house. All right, we can both sing. All right. Anyway, so once I saw Nicky Javala post that he was in the building, but he wasn't on the field, I'm like, well, that could have been a number of things. Who knows? But you would think someone like him would need every rep. Again, he could have been under the weather. He could have been sick. He could have been anything. He was in the building. He just didn't practice. He could have felt some tightness, whatever, right? Like, we don't know what it is, but just something to note. He was not out there on the field. Something else that I found really interesting. Before we get to that, watching the quarterbacks, Jaden Daniels. So they were doing drills where, and we saw them do this drill last week, where they hand the ball off, they roll out. There's another coach there or assistant there tossing them a ball, and then they have to make a throw out on the perimeter on the move, right? Kind of stop, plant, or you can continue to move on the run and throw on the move. I love the drill, by the way, because you simulate, you're getting work with two different groups, right? You're getting the running back, getting on his track after taking the handoff and making the right read and making the cut. And then also you get the quarterback coming off of that thing, rolling out, simulating a bootleg, getting out into the flats and hitting a target, right? On the move. Everybody was doing it to the right, with ease because every quarterback on this roster and most quarterbacks in the league are right-handed. Then you get everybody having to do it going to the left, and you see how everybody adjusts to throwing on the move across your body because you're right-handed, right? You're going to the left, so you got to figure it out. Are you one of those, turn your body, shift it, and then throw? Or are you one of those people that can kind of like Aaron Rodgers, jump in the air, throw it right across your body? Are you one of those people that can do from a funky angle and drop? And Jaden does this crazy drop down, 3/4 sideways, throw where I'm like, there's no way that's complete. And it's a perfect ball. And he starts dancing off because it was the crazy, looks like some Patrick Mahomes meets Aaron Rodgers crazy shit, with a little Salt Bay of, Matthew Stafford with the arm slot, right? It was crazy. And he starts dancing because he completed it. I'm like, that was wild. Like, he's so talented, man. But that had nothing to do with nothing. It was just an observation that I made watching, them at practice. But, something that is noteworthy, and again, it's OTAs, take everything with a grain of salt. The offensive line, Mitch Tischler had this because I was trying to see it on the Commanders coverage, like who was lining up with who and who was where. But, they had like the second and the third team offensive line out there. So you really, at the time that they were showing them, you never got to see the first unit out there. So Mitch Tischler had a post where the starting group was out there. And obviously not everyone's there. So they're shuffling around pieces. And as you heard Joe Witt Jr. say at his press conference, they're moving guys around. They're putting guys with units that they wouldn't normally be with, third string guy getting reps with the, second team guys getting reps with the first team just to see how they react and respond. This is the time you do that, right? And even in training camp, you'll do some of those things just to see how guys respond to being out there and getting those types of reps. But you wanted to see, most notably for me, what the offensive line looks like specifically at guard. We already know what the tackles are going to be, right? Or at least we assume we know what left tackle is going to look like. That's already reserved for Laramie Tunsil. And we know what center is going to look like. That's reserved for Tyler Biadasz. What we don't know is what they're going to do at right tackle. I believe it's going to be Josh Connolly Jr. day one, but it could also be Andrew Wiley day one, and they could be platooning. Either way, it's one of those two at right tackle. The question is, what are we doing at guard? Does the loser of that right tackle battle then go to right guard? Or do you put Nick Allegretti there, right? And where does Brandon Coleman figure into all of this? We just assume it's left guard, right? That's what makes the most logical sense. He played the left side of the offensive line last year. Don't change his body posture. Don't change his movements. Keep him on the left side. That's where there's a clear opening on this offensive line. That's the only spot that is not spoken for. Put him there, right? So, and this is the thing that I love about this particular coaching staff is, an organization for that matter, on a much larger scale, we don't have to worry about them not getting the simple shit right. We don't have to worry about, did they realize that we didn't produce enough turnovers? Did they realize that we couldn't finish off games in the defense? Did they realize we couldn't stop the run? Did they not realize we couldn't maximize the punt returning game? We don't have to worry about that type of silly, stupid, simple shit that everybody at home sitting on the couch can realize, that the last group and the group before that and the group before that didn't seem to realize. Like they were oblivious to the shit, but we're sitting at home as fans saying, we suck at this. Why can't we fix this? This group fixes things immediately. There's a problem. Here's a solution, right? So we don't have to worry. Are they going to put Brandon Coleman at left guard? Of course they're going to put Brandon Coleman at left guard because that's the logical thing to do, and this group gets it. So Mitch Tischler has a video of the first team offensive line, or what's available of it, and where guys are slotted right now. And again, take it with a grain of salt, as I said at the top of this thing. But it was Trent Scott at left tackle, right? Which he's a placeholder for Laramie Tunsil. Cool. That's notable that he's there with the first group because, and they know Trent Scott. It's not like they got to figure out what he is or what he isn't. They know him. He was here last year. He carved out a niche for himself in those big jumbo packages. So when you start thinking about the roster and who's going to be here and who may not, Trent Scott looks like a guy that's going to probably be here. He might be taking over. And again, we'll see what Foster Sorrell does and how he's able to differentiate himself and separate himself from some of the other guys that may be competing for that swing tackle position. Foster Sorrell could be here or he could not be here. But Trent Scott feels like a guy that has to play his way off the roster because he's already on it as of right now. So he was at left tackle. Next to him at left guard, you guessed it, Brandon Coleman, which I think is going to be his new home, right? Which is what we talked about last night. I talked about year two guys, right? Year two guys and rookies and what my expectation are for these guys. Coleman, my expectation, solidify and lock down the left guard position and be the equivalent of what we've gotten Sam Cosmi at right guard. Well, he's starting that journey now. He was at left guard. Tyler Biadasz at center, which we already know, right? Right guard. Interesting. Nick Allegretti. I love it. And I said the biggest loser in all of this offensive line shuffling and upgrading this group and creating better depth was Nick Allegretti. But he doesn't have to be the biggest losers. Now, right now, he was at right guard. I love it. I love it. And while he was at tackle. Now, here's the thing. I love it because Nick Allegretti didn't do anything wrong. He didn't do anything wrong. He was as solid gets. We just want better. However, until Sam Cosmi comes back healthy, he, to me, is your best bet at guard unless, and this is where the biggest loser thing comes in, unless your first round pick, Josh Connolly Jr., isn't ready for tackle duties quite yet. And they decide, we're going to put you in at guard until you're ready at tackle. Now there's nowhere for Nick Allegretti to play. Again, I got no issues with him being the first guy off the bench on the interior. None whatsoever. But if you get Connolly out there at right tackle, which is what we assume is going to happen, and Allegretti's at right guard until Cosmi comes back, I feel just as good about that line as I do any other combination that we can put together until Cosmi comes back. So it was good to see him at right guard as well. And we'll see how, the pieces of that puzzle fit together. And they're going to throw all these guys in different situations and mix and match parts just to see who plays where, best and, what the chemistry looks like. And ultimately, when it's all said and done, I think we're going to look at this offensive line, and from left to right, it's going to look like this. Laramie Tunsil, left tackle, Brandon Coleman, left guard, Tyler Biadasz, center, Nick Allegretti, right guard, and Josh Connolly Jr., right tackle. That's what I think this starting offensive line is going to look like. And then by the time you get to week 7 or 8, insert Sam Cosmi, and now you've got an ironclad starting 5 up front in front of Jaden Daniels. And we can see what it really looks like. And hopefully guys stay healthy and they're able to build that chemistry. That's the one thing you're not going to get in year 1 is that chemistry. The good thing is Cosmi has worked next to Tyler Biadasz for a year. However, he hasn't worked next to the rookie at all, Josh Connolly Jr. So there's no communication between those two. They haven't gotten a chance to get a feel for, if this guy does this, here's what I'm going to do so you can play off of that sort of thing. So we really won't see the full continuity of this line, assuming health, obviously, until next year or at best later on in the 2025 season as Cosmi gets comfortable, fully healthy, and this group gets, 5, 6, 7, 8 games under their belt together. Then you'll start to see this thing maybe gel in the way that we want to. But again, that's assuming health. We saw Biadasz go down a couple of times last year, have to leave games, etc. So you don't know if everyone else is going to stay healthy. But assuming health and assuming guys are able to do that, that's when we'll probably be able to see if guys can stay, if we can get this thing to kind of coalesce the way that we want it to. But I'm thinking more along the lines of next year, right? So in any event, so that was some of the on-field things that I was able to kind of see and take notice of. as you get to what was said in some of these press conferences, I'm going to save the best for last. So I'm going to save Joe Witt Jr. for last because the Joe Witt Jr. press conference was gold. This is off-season gold, what he gave us, right? Literally, his press conference set up half of what Dan Quinn's press conference was, because he was so effusive in his praise of two particular players that the media then took those comments, ran to it with Dan Quinn after practice, and half of his press conference was then reacting to the comments made by Joe Witt Jr. So we'll save Joe Witt Jr.'s press conference for last and get to what DQ said. And so he talked about, you know, what Phase 3 is and how it's more in line with the NBA and how guys are, you know, taking the macro approach of improving their game, like working on this one specific skill, right? He said, that's what this is about. We don't have pads on, so we can't hit, and, you know, you don't get to see the physicality. So he said the biggest thing is, and he gave an example of Coach Witt, right? Taking, I think he said 3 safeties and a linebacker, and he was showing them how to approach, press, and then release with a tight end, right? That's lined up in line, right? As attached to the offensive line as a Y, right? In line Y tight end. How to approach him, how to get your hands on him, ride him, pause, and then, you know, turn and locate. So, because, you know, that seam route, you know, it's key to get your hands on him, push him out as far as you can, and then turn, and while still attached to him, still, you know, physically attached to him, know where he is, but then look back for the ball. Because that quarterback, a lot of times on those seam routes, I know, you know, the best of the best used to do this, especially Drew Brees. They would say, if I see the defender's numbers against my tight end up the seam, he's open, I'm throwing it, right? So you got to turn and look, see if you can find the football. That's huge. So he said, you know, it was great to see. He said, thought that was a great application and use of the time that they have, taking that small group of about 4 or 5 players and really showing them how to get into a tight end and, you know, really, really get that kind of work in that setting. And he said, if you can do that, you know, in pockets across the entire roster, guys get better, right? So he talked about that. He talked about this time, again, you can't see physicality. So what can you see? Speed, right? Speed. And he talked about, if they were out at practice yesterday, you would have seen that it was the Ashburn relays. He said it was speed, speed, speed. They wanted to see everything being done at a high, you know, breakneck speed pace, right? And that is important, because one of the things I've talked about with this group is I don't think we had enough team speed last year. I thought we weren't a slow team. We've seen slow teams here in Washington before. You know, you go back to 2019 and you go to some of those, you know, 2020, some of those early Rivera teams, some of those late Jay Gruden teams. You want to talk about slow teams. You know, we had some slow teams. Foster Mason, or Mason Foster, excuse me, and some of these other guys are your linebackers, and, you know, John Bostic is your, like, we've seen slow teams, right? I don't have to explain to you what slow, you know, defensive teams and just slow teams in general look like. At one point, we had 2 fast guys on the roster on offense, Terry McLaurin and Steven Sims Jr., and Steven Sims Jr. isn't actually really fast. So, like, we were a slow football team. But last year, I thought we lacked speed in certain areas, and it showed up. And one of the markers to me, and I've said this, and I talked about this when Dan Quinn was in Dallas. I said, one thing I've always loved and admired about Dan Quinn's defenses from afar, this going all the way back to his Atlanta days, but really he cemented it for me in Dallas, because you watched it in Seattle, then he goes to Atlanta, and even though they weren't great defensively, they played fast with guys like Deion Jones and Keanu Neal. They played fast. And Ricardo Allen, they played fast. You can say what you want about the skill level, but they were flying around and they were hitting anything that moved. They didn't give a shit. We'll sort all the rest of that shit out later, right? That's what they did in Dallas. That's what I expected here. And you saw glimpses of it last year, but we just didn't have enough. So now they're really preaching speed. We got to play faster. And DQ said it all last year. They're not playing fast enough. We can play faster. Joe Witt Jr. said, we're not playing fast enough. We got to play faster. So to hear him talk about that, pretty cool. DQ answered a question about Mikey Sainristil and Deebo Samuel working out after practice together. And so this is more of that brotherhood, and we'll get into that because that's another conversation that he talked about, and Joe Witt did as well. But that's that brotherhood bond that you don't get if you're a Marshawn Lattimore or a Laramie Tunsil. And what that also says to me is they don't care about that shit. You know, that's cool. That brotherhood shit is cool. But I'm here to do my job and then go home. Right? It's the same thing Rio was saying. Like, don't ask Marshawn Lattimore to stay after 1 second longer than he has to. Soon as it's time to punch that clock, he's already in the parking lot. Right? This is the time where you build that bond, that brotherhood shit that they talk about. Joe Witt Jr. talked about how that 3-game losing streak, this is the part of the year that helped them get through that 3-game losing streak in season. We'll talk about that more when we get to Joe Witt. But to see Mikey and Deebo getting that work in off to the side late after practice, it just goes to show you that, one, Mikey wants to be like, I said this last night. He's the equivalent of Jaden Daniels in terms of what we see as a young star on the defensive side. He's not Jaden Daniels. He's not the equivalent of what Jaden Daniels represents. But if we're talking an offensive young star and a defensive young star, those are the guys, right? From last year's draft that are pillars, are building blocks of this team moving forward. Mikey on the defensive side, Jaden on the offensive side. And this is another example of that. Because it wasn't Deebo that pulled him aside and said, hey, let's get in somewhere. And I don't know this. My guess is because Deebo is a veteran. Like, I doubt that Deebo's like, yo, young fella, come over here. Let me see some of the things that you're doing so I can get better. It probably was the other way around. If you use common sense, right? And again, I don't know. It could have been Deebo. It could have been a mutual thing. But the guess is Mikey approached him and said, hey, man, let's get some side work in real quick. And let me just pick your brain a little bit about some of your releases, some of the things you do. You play in the slot a little bit. You do some of this. You do some of that. Help me with some of my technique. I need to kind of get a little bit better, refine some of this stuff as I'm moving back inside to the slot. And D was like, oh, yeah, hell yeah, we can do that, right? So that's just another example of Mikey taking the initiative. Jaden always does this. Jaden shows up earlier than any player in the building every single day that he has to be there. That's a part of his routine, right? He's watching film. He's a junkie. We know that, a film junkie. Mikey is a guy that he just gets it. Wise beyond his years. You talk to anybody that is associated with him and they'll tell you, wise beyond his years, conducts himself like a veteran. That's all we heard about Mikey Sainristil last year, is that you can't tell that he's a rookie. This is another example of that. So, DQ was talking about, that brotherhood. In order for us to take that next step as an entire unit, as an entire team, you need guys making each other better. That's how you get to that next level, right? You're only as strong as your weakest link. So every guy has to push the guy next to him to be better. And DQ talked about how, some veterans, a lot of you see guys like Dietrich Wise making his rounds. I've seen him on a number of different shows, and Jonathan Jones, those two Patriot players that we brought in from free agency. have spoke glowingly about the culture, the brotherhood, if you will, right? And they said that this culture is on point. This brotherhood is legit, and they feel it, they sense it. And he said the reason that it's legit is because the first thing that they emphasize is you gotta be a good teammate. I mean, we want dudes that can ball, no doubt, but you gotta be a good teammate. And he's like, well, no shit, DQ. Like, but he's saying at the same time, we don't want having fun and working hard to be two separate entities. We want those two things to overlap and happen simultaneously, right? We can go out here, work hard, get after it, empty the tank, as DQ likes to say, but have fun while doing all of that. And he said being a good teammate is at the top of the pile. So again, when we talk about drafts moving forward, and we hear any issues with a guy in a locker room as a teammate, you know that guy isn't a Commander, because that's something that they take very seriously. They hold that near and dear to their hearts. As far, and they're not saying that you got to be a Boy Scout, but they are saying you can't be a dickhead and an asshole to your teammates, because that's how locker rooms become divisive and split at the seams. And that ain't the shit that we cultivate in here. You might be a little rough around the edges, but as long as people say, man, he has some shit going on off the field, but he was a hell of a teammate, they can work with that. What they can't work with is, hey, this dude right here, he's a malcontent in the locker room. He's divisive in the locker room. Wasn't the greatest teammate. You're not going to hear that coming out of Washington. So he emphasized that again during his press conference. And again, like, we stand for something. For the longest time, as Commanders fans, as Redskins fans, as football team fans, we stood for nothing. So we would fall for anything as a fan base because we didn't know what we stood for. We didn't know what a Commander looked like. We didn't know what a Redskin looked like for a long time. We never knew what a Washington football team member looked like. For those 2 years, we had no clue. We were spinning in place. Now we have an identity. We know what a Commander looks like. We know what they're looking for. We know some of the criteria. So again, DQ always makes sure he reinforces that. He talked about Daron Payne, and we're going to talk about Daron Payne a lot on this show. Daron Payne, contract Daron Payne incoming. That shit is loaded. Pop, pop, pop. They let off some shots this offseason. And they didn't specifically say that they were for Daron Payne, but they were for Daron Payne. And he heard this shit loud and clear. We'll get to that in a second. He talked about Daron Payne and the difference he's seen in him. And he's like, yo, Daron is locked in. And I told him, and this is DQ speaking, I told him, I walked by him and I told him today, you're having a hell of an offseason. You're having a hell of an offseason. When the coaches notice it, it's a thing. Okay. Again, take it with a grain of salt. We're in June, folks, right? Don't overreact. But they didn't have to say that. Nobody specifically asked them about Daron Payne. I mean, they asked Dan Quinn about Daron Payne, but they asked him about Daron Payne because of what Joe Witt Jr. said, which we'll get to here in a second. So they didn't have to say what they said about Daron Payne. They didn't have to say what they said about Quan Martin. Again, DQ talked about, and you know, DQ talking about Quan Martin. I just have to emphasize, there are no more tough guys on the planet Earth than football players. You have to be wired a certain way to play this game that we all love, to watch. Because most of you don't have the stones to play football. You love it. You love the physicality, the brutality of the sport, and all that it entails, but you don't have the physical or mental toughness to withstand what these guys go through, right? Everybody loves the glitz and glamour. People love to talk about how much money these guys get paid. You don't see the shit that they go through. Nobody wants to talk about what after their football career looks like. The Lions just had their center, Frank Ragnow, at 29 years old, retired. You don't know the shit that Frank Ragnow had to go through to play till he was 29. And he realized, I ain't got nothing left to give. If I want to have a good quality of life, I got to stop now at 29. We're talking about an all-pro center. Quan Martin played with 2 dislocated shoulders last year. So when he misses a tackle that allows Saquon Barkley to score, and I'm not trying to make any excuses for anybody, but when he misses a tackle, because the same shit that we talking about now, he made the interception against Jared Goff and returned it for a touchdown with those same 2 dislocated shoulders he was playing with. So what we're not going to do is just make a bunch of excuses. But the man was playing with 2 dislocated shoulders. So you got to excuse him if he misses the damn tackle. We don't want it to happen, but the man was playing with 2 dislocated shoulders. You know how hard it is? DQ was like, the man couldn't use both of his shoulders, both of his arms this offseason because he had one surgically repaired, and then once that one healed, he had the other one surgically repaired. That's the type of shit football players go through. And we don't know at home. All we know is, damn, Quan Martin ain't practice today. I hope he can play on Sunday. And DQ said, what I learned about Quan Martin is that he is as tough as nails and he's a competitor's competitor. And he said, we kept him out of practice a few times, but he wasn't ever going to miss a game. So I just want to reiterate that these football players are a different breed. I don't ever want to hear nobody compare an NFL player to an NBA player or a Major League Baseball player. And those guys put their bodies on the line in different ways, but it ain't like this shit. NFL players are more like hockey players. The physicality and the things that those guys go through, but the NFL shit is next level. It's next level. So he talked about Quan Martin and his toughness and all that entails as well. So that was and DQ also confirmed that we will be joint practicing with the Patriots. They're the first game on our preseason schedule. We'll talk about that more tonight on the Commanders Kings program. And we will be joint practicing with the Ravens as well. That is our final preseason game, the week 3 preseason contest. I believe that one is on August the 22nd. Still no word on if there's going to be a joint practice with the Cincinnati Bengals. That's the big one because that's the nationally televised game on Monday Night Football. And that's the one, if Jaden and any of the starters are going to play in a preseason game, that'd be the one. So if they didn't joint practice, it makes sense. They'd play in the preseason game, but I don't really know what's going to happen there. That's the one that we don't have real confirmation on. But those 2 joint practices seem to be locked in with the Patriots and the Ravens. So for what that's worth, DQ did confirm that, and he said some sort of schedule will be coming out here shortly. So be on the lookout for that. So now let's get to Joe Witt Jr. and what he had to say. Let me say this too. Looking at the practice and seeing some of the guys, like it's apparent who's bigger than who. Like there's some dudes that just tower over their teammates in their positional group. So this isn't news to you. You know this already, but we're a very short wide receiver group. So when you see guys like Noah Brown, Michael Strand, and even to a lesser degree, Ja'Cory Brooks, they look so much bigger than the rest of the receivers, taller especially. Noah Brown looks like a tight end compared to, and Strand they look like tight ends compared to the rest of the receivers. We are very short wide receiver group. That was made clear by watching them stand next to their teammates in that wide receiver room. Brian Robinson Jr. is massive compared to the rest of the running backs in our running back. Right, I think people forget Brian Robinson Jr. is 6'2". He looks 6'2". When you see these 5'9", 5'8", 5'10", 5'11" running backs, and then you see Brian Robinson, who's 6'2", 220, 25 pounds, he looks like Andre the Giant. He looks like the Big Show compared to the rest of the. Him standing next to Austin Eckler, it looks like the Big Show standing next to Rey Mysterio Jr. It's crazy. So, and Brian Robinson Jr. looks to be in tremendous shape, by the way, in case you haven't seen him. He looks to be in tremendous shape. Look out for B-Rob. He heard your shit. He heard your shit this offseason. And he's playing for a contract, obviously. Anyway. So, Joe Witt Jr., let's get to his press conference. He was amazing today. He was outstanding. Typical Joe Witt Jr. shit, right? So, first thing he said that this team wanted to do, he opened his press conference by saying that this team wanted to get bigger and longer. Not my words, his. But I'll say pause for both of us. Pause. That this team wanted to get bigger and longer, and they did. Javon Kinlaw was a guy that did that along the defensive line, and Trey Amos helped them do that back in the secondary, right? So he said that was one of the emphasis that they put on the offseason and getting better as a team defensively, getting bigger, getting longer. Pause. Once again, his words, not mine. Then speaking of Javon Kinlaw, he said that Javon Kinlaw is a guy that gives them so much flexibility up front. He said he can play up and down the defensive line. He said against the run, if teams want to play big, if they want to go out and they want to get into 12 and 13 personnel, I'd even say to a lesser degree, you don't see this as often. That's why you don't hear coaches talk about it, but 21 personnel, right? You can see a guy like Javon Kinlaw be moved, he said, to the 6 tech, right? Which is just a shade outside or head up with the tight end, right? So he said you can play him inside, and he's going to be too much for a guard to deal with, that length inside. You put him outside with a tight end, be too strong for a tight end to deal with. He's big and physical. So they feel like they can do so many things with Javon Kinlaw, and they're very excited to get him and use him as a guy that's going to help the linebackers roam the field a lot freer than they did a season ago. Then the quote heard around the Commanders' world, at least for today, right, is he talked about Daron Payne. And he was asked about, is there any player in particular, was there any player in particular that you think has gotten better this offseason, that looks like, they've gotten into tremendous shape, whatever the case may be? It seems like they're locked in. They're moving at a higher rate of speed right now. And he, without hesitation, said it was Daron Payne. And then he mentioned Quan Martin as well. We'll get to that a little bit because he told an incredible Quan Martin story at the end of his press conference. But he said Daron Payne looks like I don't want to say a different person, but he's like, Deron Payne is totally locked in. And he said, Deron Payne has been going hard. He's in tremendous shape. He said, Deron is not a vocal guy, but he stepped up and he's taken on a sort of a leadership role. He said Deron has been getting after it, so much so that he got in trouble. He, being Joe Witt Jr., got in trouble with DQ the other day because DQ, you can't have contact at practice during OTAs. So he was like telling the players, the defensive players, I want to see more intensity out of y'all. I need y'all to go hard. That kind of falls in line with DQ talking about it being a track meet and guys playing at a higher rate of speed. And he, communicated that to his players, Joe Witt Jr. did, and Deron took that as, all right, I'm about to go out here and whoop some ass. And Deron was putting people on the ground and being extremely physical, and DQ was like, yo, what the hell, bro? And Joe Witt was like, hey, that's my fault. Q, that's my fault. I told them to be more aggressive, and Deron took that shit to heart. And he's like, that's been his demeanor all offseason, is he's taken it a step above. Whatever we've asked, he's went and gone a step or two above that. And from being in the best shape of potentially his career, we've seen Deron in tremendous shape before. This isn't the first time. Last time we saw him in this type of shape, though. Do I need to tell you when that was? Contract year, Deron. Okay. And they said that he's locked in as a leader. This is year 8 for Deron. And so Joe Witt was like, this is the Deron Payne that we need, essentially. This is the Deron Payne. Like, I know for a fact that when they got here, like every other coach, when they got here, part of the allure of this job was the defensive line, right? If you're a defensive-minded guy like Ron Rivera was when he got here, part of the reason Ron took this job was, one, he was being given the type of control that he wasn't going to get anywhere else. He wasn't going to be a coach GM anywhere else. He wasn't going to have total autonomy over everything anywhere else because he wasn't that good. So he wasn't getting that anywhere else. He didn't know all the shit he had to deal with here in Washington because he wasn't smart enough to understand what this shit entailed. And he didn't ask the right people. But he was mesmerized by this defensive line. And he knew he had the second pick in the draft, and he was getting Chase Young, and he already had Montez Sweat, Jonathan Allen, and Deron Payne. That's why he took this job. And when Joe Witt Jr. and Dan Quinn came here, it wasn't the same, right? They had already traded away Montez Sweat and Chase Young. It was just the Bama wall left. But that was a start because they couldn't stop the run in Dallas. Well, they were thinking, we're not going to have that issue here because we got those 2 Bama boys inside, right? And I'm pretty sure they were disappointed in what they got last year from the defensive tackles. And that's why Jonathan Allen is no longer here. And I'm telling you, that was a wake-up call to Deron Payne because, Jonathan Allen was his best friend on the team. They were like brothers. They played at Alabama together. They essentially came into the league damn near together 1 year apart. They've been essentially teammates for the last decade, going back to their days at Alabama. So those two, they got in a fight on the sidelines. That's what brothers do, right? If you got a brother, you already know what it is. You can fight with him 5 minutes later, y'all cool again because y'all family. So they took his bro out back, and all he heard was 2 shots, bop, bop. 2 shots to that man's commander's career, to his head. Now, his career here is dead. And he heard that. And he probably shed a tear, and he was like, all right. He wiped his eyes, and he was like, I got to get my shit together, or I'm next. This man is making the most money of anybody on the team right now. Not for much longer, because Terry's he's gonna clear that bar substantially, right? But Right now, Deron Payne's making the most money of any player on this team. And he realizes next year, snip, 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 snip. They'll cut him quick, just like they did John Allen if they can't find a trade partner. So, with that said, he knows what he's got to do. And you're seeing contract Deron Payne. If we get contract Deron Payne in 2025, oh, shit. Oh, shit. I think contract Deron Payne is loading, y'all. I think contract Deron Payne is loading, y'all. I'm just telling you. This is a big deal that Joe Witt Jr. says that Deron Payne is killing it this offseason. Dan Quinn said the exact same thing. Deron Payne is in tip-top, tremendous shape. He's locked in. And to me, it's never been a talent issue with Deron Payne. It's simply him just being locked in. He's got something at stake this year. Because he could be like Jonathan Allen and get paid somewhere else. He's still a good football player. Somebody else will pay him if he gets cut from here. But who doesn't want to be where they've been their entire careers? You want to start and finish your career in the same spot if at all possible. And I'll tell you something else. Deron Payne went through all that losing. Same thing we said about Jonathan Allen, which sucked. He went through all that losing. Finally got to where this shit gets turned around and you got a quarterback that you know you can win with. A quarterback you know you can hit your wagon to. And now you gone? That shit sucks. Deron sees what this shit is. And he sees what we got. And he understands what this could be. He wants to be a part of this. Telling you, contract season Deron Payne loading, y'all. This shit finna be a movie. Couple of Commander veterans and B-Rob and Deron Payne. They hear your shit. They see that in every trade, one of these two dudes is in the shit. When y'all try to cook up a trade for Trey Hendrickson or some other player, one of them two is in the trade. They hear your bullshit. They see your bullshit. And they raise you a contract season. Even though this is not technically a contract year for Deron, we know this is a contract year for Deron. Because if he doesn't play well, he's going to suffer the same fate that his bro just suffered this offseason in Jonathan Allen. He talked about Marshawn Lattimore. I thought this was a dumb question. And I thought Ben Standing asked some good questions today, but this was a dumb one, right? He asks, what have you seen from Marshawn? First of all, you're going to say Marshawn Lattimore hasn't been here, right? Which we all know he hasn't been here for any of the offseason activities. What have you seen from him this offseason? How the hell am I going to see something from someone that ain't been here? Where's the psychological sense in that, Ben? And so Joe Witt was like, he hasn't been here, so haven't seen anything. Now, we've been in contact with him, and we know he's working out and he's in shape, and we'll find out just how good a shape he's in when he gets here. So I'm assuming he'll be there next week at the mandatory minutes, which they've been in contact with him, and they have no reason to believe that he won't be. Same with Laremy Tunsil, right? This was a great response by Joe Witt Jr. So he was asked about Dante Fowler Jr. and his production last year and replacing it. And he said, did anybody in here think that Dante Fowler Jr. was going to have 10 sacks last year? None of y'all thought he was going to have 10 sacks last year. And how many times have I said that to y'all? I said, did any of us think that was good? I was excited because we finally had a situational pass rusher. But by no means did that mean, oh, he's finna get 10 sacks this year, double digits. I was just hoping he could get a 6 or 7 sacks, right? 6 would have been great. The man said, "No, I got you for 10 and a half." Well, damn. Thank you. But Joe Witt said, look, nobody thought he was getting 10 sacks when we signed him last year. Somebody's going to step up and do what he did last year and exceed expectations. Or, and this is what I've insinuated, because I don't think there's a single guy. Look, Dante Fowler Jr. has talent. And he was drafted as a first-round pick. And he's had double-digit sacks before. Now, it was a long time ago, like 2017, long time ago. Long times ago, right? But he's done it. And he has the talent to do it. So that wasn't a shock that he was capable of doing it and that he actually did it. We just didn't expect it. Man had 4 sacks the season before and hadn't had double-digit sacks in like 6-7 years. However, he was capable. There ain't a guy on this roster that has had double-digit sacks before or even been remotely close that they've brought in here. So to say that someone is going to do that, I think is a bit far-fetched. Again, it could be Jacob Martin, right? It's not going to be Dietrich Wise. It's not going to be Javon Kinlaw, although it could be. You never know. But in my mind, and Joe Witt also said that, he said it's either going to be one guy that, does what Dante Fowler Jr. essentially did last year, which is come out of nowhere and get to the quarterback, or it's going to be a collective effort. And that's what I think. It's going to be a collective effort on the part of these guys where everybody's going to do a little bit more, right? And that's what I talked about when I said meet the pass rush. Everybody's going to do a little bit more. And next thing you know, you look up and that 10 and a half sacks, they've exceeded that number, right? Jacob Martin's career high, I believe, is 4.5. He goes out and gets you 6.5. Well, that's 2 right there. Javon Kinlaw, right? I think he had his career high last year. I think it was 4.5 as well, something along those lines. Well, he goes out and he gets you 7. Well, there's an addition. I mean, and if we forget about that, if Jacob Martin gets you 6, and let's just say Javon Kinlaw gets you 4.5, well, there's your 10.5 sacks right there. There you are. And anything that anybody else produces, Dietrich Wise, it's extra. It's extra. So I love that answer from him because we didn't expect that from DFJ last year. And we don't expect it from any of these guys, but somebody could step up and do it. But it's more likely to be a collective effort. He talked about the importance of OTAs for rookies. And it's kind of what DQ said last week about what this time is really about. It's about fine-tuning your skill, getting better, working on the subtleties and nuances of your game. Like like DQ talked about with Joe Witt Jr. taking like 4 or 5 players in a small group and showing them how to, get into a tight end, essentially, off the line of scrimmage and coverage, jam and then, run with them, turn and find a football, working on that technique. These are the types of things you do in OTAs, right? But even more important than that is the brotherhood. And he said, he used the example of last year's 3-game losing streak. And he said the only way we were able to get through that was the brotherhood. Because it's easy. And I always tell y'all, sports is a microcosm of life. And to me, this is another example of that. Like, in times of adversity, you find out who your real friends are, who the people that you really can count on are. It's easy when shit is going well for people to be around and everybody wants to party and everybody wants to be in your presence when shit is going well. What happens when shit isn't going well? Who can you turn to? Who can you trust? Who has your back? When the money runs out, when you're in the hospital, when somebody passes away, who's there for you? This is a similar situation to a lesser degree, obviously. But during that 3-game losing streak, It's easy to point. We watch seasons go to hell in a handbasket under Ron Rivera, under Jay Gruden. Great starts to the season under Gruden. Fall apart at the seams at the end of the season, and you can't beat a lifeless Giants team that has nothing to play for because they've been in the playoffs for 2 weeks already. All you got to do is win and you're in the playoffs. And they bullshitting at practice. Guys aren't giving a shit, and you go out there and you lose to a team that had nothing to play for. Right? Because there's no brotherhood. We watch Ron Rivera seasons that started out like shit, team got hot, and then collapsed down the stretch because there was no brotherhood. That could have easily happened last year. Started 7-2, you go through this adverse stretch, you lose 3 straight, and instead of people pointing fingers, the locker room coming apart at the seams, Jonathan Allen putting on a do-rag and bitching and complaining, instead of that shit happening, the brotherhood showed up. And Bobby Wagner said, I told them, this is a great team, not a good team, a great team. Told the media, y'all come back and talk to me in 4 weeks. I bet y'all talking some different shit then. And what happened? We didn't lose another game to the NFC Championship game. He said, that's what you build now. And that's important for these rookies. And he said rookies get more meetings, they get more attention this time of the year. So they get more meeting time than veterans do. And so they're using that time, obviously, to get them up to speed and get them where they need to be. But this OTA, this is why I said you want guys here. Listening to Santana Moss talk about, he's like, I use this time to get better. It's cool to be around your teammates. He never played in a brotherhood. So he don't know nothing about that. Ask Santana Moss about a brotherhood. They have relationships in the locker room. Him and Clinton Portis and Chris Cooley and all, those guys were tight. But those locker rooms were fractured. He played in locker rooms where you were either team Kirk Cousins or team Robert Griffin III. There was no brotherhood. You had to pick a side. That's why OTAs are important, because this is when you establish those relationships, those bonds that become unbreakable. And then when you hit adversity in the season, you're able to fall back on those relationships that were forged back in April, in May, in June, into July. And now all of a sudden, hey, we got this shit. We can overcome this. I know. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? You know the answer to that. He talked about Jordan McGee. I literally talked about Jordan McGee yesterday. And I said they had high hopes. I still have high hopes for Jordan McGee. But on yesterday's show, I talked about the second-year guys and the rookies and what some reasonable expectations are. And I said the biggest thing for Jordan McGee is to stay healthy because they got plans for him. And I said the thing that's very interesting about, last year, you could tell that they had a plan for him and they were going to put him on the field in certain packages where teams wanted to put, more tight ends, more, fullback, whatever the case may be on the field. And you could stay in your base, but instead of putting another safety on the field or being a little bit smaller, you could get bigger by putting a third linebacker on the field. Because our base is 4-2-5, right? Because who comes out in 12 or 13 personnel anymore? Nobody does that shit. Most teams operate damn near strictly out of 11 personnel, right? It's only when you get into certain down and distances do you see teams get into something other than 11, right? 12 personnel. But generally speaking, you're just seeing 10 personnel. Most of the time you see 11 personnel. Every now and again, you'll see 12 personnel. But when teams want to get into 12, that's when you can, and we would put Mykal Walker. I remember the Saints, came out in some 12 personnel because their quarterback situation was shit, right? They had the model, Jake Hayner out there, and then they had Spencer Rattler. They came out in 12 personnel, and we had Mykal Walker out there getting dusted. And I'm like, yeah, okay, this shit ain't gonna work. That was supposed to be Jordan McGee, right? So he said we had a plan for him. And, we were going to put him in. And when teams wanted to go to 12, we had a package for him. but he got hurt. He said the biggest thing he has to do this year is stay healthy. But we want him on the field. And just like last year, we're going to have a package where teams go into the, and I said this yesterday. I said, we play a schedule where teams are going to get into 12 and 13 personnel. Like, they're not going to hide the fact that they're trying to run the ball. Right out of the gates. You got the Chargers on the schedule. The Falcons are going to want to run the ball. I think the Giants, to a lesser degree, are going to want to run the football, but we'll see. But with Russell Wilson as your quarterback, I assume you're going to have to run the football, right? To get to the play action fake, to get to those shots down the field, but we'll see. But you're going to play a lot of teams this year who want to run the football. They're littered up and down this schedule. The Raiders with Pete Carroll are going to run the football. They didn't draft Ashton Genty for fun. The Broncos want to run the football. Sean Payton is people misconstrue what Sean Payton is as an offensive player. He wants to run the football. He always has, always will. We're going to have to stop the run this season. You played the Eagles twice. Jordan McGee will be on the field. He's just got to stay healthy. And he said, we got a plan for him. They had one last year. Then he was asked, and this was one of my favorite answers because it was truthful and it's the same shit. And this is why I said, this group is so much better because they just get the simple shit, the obvious shit that other groups, other iterations of the Commanders front office and staff, they just didn't get. Other regimes were clueless as to the shit that we needed to have done, and it was the easiest shit to see. You, me, and some lay fan that doesn't watch anything in the offseason but just watches the games could detect. And they were clueless to it. So Joe Witt Jr. was asked, how can we do better on defense? How can the defense be better? And he said there were three things that stuck out to him. And we could all name those three things before he said it. And it was like somebody opened up a window on a nice spring day, no pollen, just fresh air. And it was stale air in the house. And you open up the window and it's a cool breeze just came in and you just went, or you just stepped outside after being in the sauna, right? Ain't nothing better than going in the sauna, sweating for 15, 20, 25 minutes, taking a nice, good, hot bath, stepping out of the gym, out to some fresh ass air. And your pores are open and all of that shit just, That was what this answer was right here. Hearing Joe Witt say the shit that we were saying all last year. Hell, we even made jokes. There were jokes. Remember during the season, I said, don't ask this defense for shit at the end of a game. And I used to run through all of the games at the very end where they blew it. And if not for 5 in the offense, we would have lost. I said, don't ask this defense for shit. Don't ask them for nothing at the end of a football game. And then I would do it. I would do it. I said, they didn't stop the damn Giants. They stopped themselves with a drop pass on 4th down in week 2. Don't ask them to stop Cincinnati. We went up. Jaden throws that beautiful pass to Terry McLaurin to put the exclamation point on a historic night. And what they do, let them race down the damn field and score a damn touchdown. We had to get an onside kick and kneel out the damn clock because they couldn't put it away. You go to the Ravens game in week 6. We just needed one damn stop. The offense fought, scratched, and clawed their way back into the game after being down 27-13. They fought and they overcame 3rd and 4th downs and they got us back in the game and we're within one score, right? Because it was 27-13 and that's the Terry 4th down, the Noah Brown 4th down pass interference, the Terry 4th down touchdown, right? Then they got a field goal. Then the offense went down and got a field goal. It's 30 to 27, 23. Just need to stop. They let Derrick Henry break off a 50-something yard run, 40-something yard run, end of the game. Bears game. It's 9-0. You've been holding it down all game. You want to be able to pat them on the back and say, this was all you. You did this. This was all you. Offense ain't had shit for us today. You had to bail us out. And then what they do? Wet the bed in the 4th quarter. All you need is one stop. It's 4th down and Benjamin St. Jude. Ball 15 yards over DJ Moorehead. He grabbing the man. Molesting him. Let me see some ID. They score a touchdown. And if not for one of the greatest plays in walk-off fashion in Commanders history, not one of the greatest, in Commanders history, if you're talking franchise history, we've had quite a few. But that's one of the greatest plays in franchise history. Single regular season plays. The defense would have blew that game for us too. I could keep going. Steelers game, right? The second Giants game, where the offense had to pretty much put the game away because the defense would refuse to do it. Cowboys game. Luke Schoonmaker? Really? Saints game? Yeah. That was fun, right? Right? Falcons game? How about the second Eagles game? Thank God for Devontae Smith dropping the football. You can't tackle AJ Smith on a shallow cross, AJ Brown, on a shallow cross on 4th and 6. You got lucky. 5 had to rescue us again. I can keep going. All right? Keep going. We knew we had to keep the ball away from Tampa Bay in a wild card game. So when Joe Witt Jr. says, how can we be better? One, he said, we didn't produce the ball enough. We knew that. They weren't happy with it all year last year. We weren't, as fans, happy. Because I told you the one thing that I expected from this group when they got here was we were going to force turnovers. They were going to play fast and we were going to force turnovers. Because that's what Joe Witt Jr. does. That's what Dan Quinn does. Of course, that didn't happen last year. So he's like, we didn't produce the ball enough. And then he went on to say, we dropped 16 interceptions. I think that number is a bit rich, right? It sounds good to say. Then we dropped some. Yeah, Frankie Louvu dropped about 4 by his damn self. So he's not lying. We dropped interceptions last year. 16, though, I think he's counting passes that we might have gotten our hands on. Some of them shits won't, like, he should have caught that. It was like, yo, you touched it, you should catch it. Because that's what coaches say. If you could get 2 hands on it, you should catch it. But some of them were tough. Like, he wasn't going to catch that, bro. But he's counting it anyway. I'd say that number is probably closer to 10. Yeah, we probably had about 10 interceptions that we could have caught. Like I said, Frankie Louvu dropped about 3-4 of them by his damn self. So, he said if we catch half of those, we're talking about a whole different team. He's not wrong. How about punching the ball out? He didn't make mention of that. That's something that we don't do very often. Now, we did knock some footballs free last year. We just didn't fall on them, but we need to do that more. Like, we're just not one. Like, that's why I'm excited about Jonathan Jones, because he's one of those dudes that actually actively seeks out the football and is looking to punch it out. Like, that's a mentality thing. Stopping the run. We all know about our issues stopping the run. That was well documented, and you saw the reaction to that this offseason with the way that they approach free agency. So, duh. And then the one that got me excited, as you can tell, I don't know if you noticed, but he said closing games. That was a huge elephant in the room that I thought they were going to try to dance around and not acknowledge. But that ain't Joe Witt's style. Like, Joe Witt Jr. doesn't run away from the truth. He runs towards it. Like, nah, we didn't close games. You damn right you didn't close games last year. It was a damn embarrassment, this defense at the end of football games. They got to be way better than they were. And to me, closing games it was a combination of both because we got run on and thrown on at the ending ball games. But closing games is more about being able to get to the quarterback, which still could be an issue for this team. But if you can be better in the secondary and you trust the guys on the back end, which we did not last year. And even when the coaching staff trusted them, the guys on the field didn't trust themselves. So that allows you to get more aggressive. That allows you to get more aggressive. And so maybe you'll see some more exotic blitzes or something a little bit more in line with being able to produce some pressure on quarterbacks. I mean, there's no way Michael Penix Jr. should have been able to overcome that snap on a second down that put him in like 3rd and 27. There was no way they should have gotten 14 on 3rd and 27 and got to 4th and goal from the 13 and then throw a touchdown pass. I mean, how bad of a defense? That's a rookie quarterback making his 2nd NFL start. How bad do you have to be? But that's who we were. Couldn't get to the quarterback. Couldn't make any plays. That's who we were. So we'll see if that's better this year, right? That one made me smile. That made my heart smile listening to him talk about the deficiencies of this defense and how they have to improve. He talked about Payne Medrano, and he was pretty blunt. Who is Payne Medrano? Is he Jeremy, as in Jeremy Chin? Or is he Frankie, as in Frankie Louvu? Like, how do we use him? You know, is he a guy that can play down around the box and be effective that way? Or is he Frankie Louvu? And he's a guy that we can pressure the quarterback with and do all of these different things with and have him be a chess piece. What is he? His Jeremy Chin was more of a box safety guy, come down, be physical, but also a tremendous athlete, so they could use him in a multitude of ways. But he wasn't a guy you were pressuring the quarterback with, and he had limitations, you know, in coverage, etc. Whereas Frankie is just this loose cannon. He can, you know, get to the quarterback. He's rangy. He can go sideline to sideline, and you can have him do a bunch of stuff and really affect the game. So who are you? Are you a combination of both? We got to find out. So he's an interesting guy. My expectations for him are really low this year. It's not until year 2 of Payne Medrano where, and again, he's pretty high on the list of guys I'll be watching this offseason to kind of see what they bring to the table. He talked about the safety group. And he went through each guy in that room and kind of talked about where they are right now. And the first guy he brought up was Quan Martin. And he said, you know, Quan is the leader of that group, essentially. They feel so good about what he can do. And we're going to talk more about Quan at the end of this Joe Witt Jr. press conference. Then he said that the next guy was Will Harris, who they brought in via free agency, and they love his ability to cover. He was a former corner that has the ability to do so many different things. He can also come up, play aggressively around the line of scrimmage. So that gives them more of the ability to rock and roll. Now Quan can come up a little bit. And Logan Paulson talked about this a little bit during the telecast of the OTA practice about his excitement about Will Harris joining this defense, because it gives them that much more versatility in the secondary. You know, instead of Quan always having to stay back, can't really come up towards this line of scrimmage, or you're afraid to drop Quan over the slot because Quan played slot a lot at Illinois and was really good at it. You can't really ask him to do that because you couldn't put Jeremy Chin back there as a single high or a guy that could, you know, be responsible for that, you know, a deep third and feel comfortable about that. Whereas now you can do that if you need to, because Will Harris has the speed to play deep. I mean, you're talking about a 4-3 guy, right? Will Harris can run. And, you know, you're talking about a guy that's got coverage ability, so he can do that. Quan can come up and play if need to, if need be. But if you want Quan to stay back there and continue to be the field general that he's been. Well, Will Harris can come up and play in the slot or come down in the box and be a physical guy and an enforcer. So he talked about that. He talked about wanting to do more with Jeremy Reeves. Said he's an ace on special teams, but all he does is make plays, and we got to figure out a way to get him on defense. That sounds a lot like Defoe last year, right? He said the same thing about Defoe. Hey, we got to find a way to get him on the field, and never really did. So I don't think Jeremy Reeves is going to get on the field defensively, but cool, whatever, right? He talked about Tyler Owens, and he said, can he be a Buffalo nickel? Can he be one of these big physical Jeremy Chin type guys that you feel good about down around the line of scrimmage, which we know that's what his skill set suggests he should be able to do. But they got to find out if he's ready for that kind of work. So what I do want to talk about is noticeably absent from that conversation was one Percy Butler. He went through all the safeties. Not one mention of Percy Butler. I'm not saying. I'm just saying. Okay? I said, Percy, look out. You could be in trouble. Maybe you aren't. Maybe you are. That could be something. That could be nothing. It could be everything. It could be zero. Again, I'm not saying. I'm just saying. Nikki Javala asked him, so she must be writing an article about interior rush versus exterior rush. So she asked him about and I brought this up when I said meet the pass rush. I brought up that conversation about I think our interior rush has to be better this year because it'll help the guy. I thought that last year, Dorrance Armstrong Jr. won a lot off the edge, but there was no interior pressure, so quarterbacks would just step up and he would just be pushed around the pocket. And if there was a little bit of collapse there, there was a dent in that pocket, then I think there would have been more sacks and more opportunities for quarterbacks to have to throw the football away, et cetera, from this defense. So I do think the interior rush is important. And you ask the quarterback, and it doesn't matter what generation, past, present, no quarterback likes interior rush. They feel like I could just step up if a guy wins off the edge. I can just step up. I can avoid him. It's the rush that's right in your face. I got so upset at Jaden a couple of times last year on some sacks where you're like, bro, he's 300 pounds. What are you doing? Remember the sack I got pissed off against the Steelers when he was trying to run away from Cam Hayward? And he zigzagged and he ran back into him and got sacked. But that's the type of shit that your brain gets scrambled when a dude is just coming at you. When a rusher, pause. I'm thinking about this IG video that I saw with these ladies watching. This shit is hilarious. So when a rusher comes, when a rusher is able to get free into the backfield and it's right up the middle, it's hard for your brain to come. What the hell do I do? Where do I go? It's easy when there's a rusher screaming off the edge. Oh shit, I just step up. I might be able to outrun him, to my right and get rid of it. There's so many things you can do. When a rusher gets free up the middle, yeah, try not to use that word. Is rough because that's the word we've used for so long. Stuff. I will admit this. But when that rusher gets free, right up the middle, it's tough. And we saw him not be able to avoid 300-pound dudes last year. Whereas guys that were blitzing that are, nickels and safeties and edges, he outran them, jumped over guys, kept it pushing. I mean, he made those look easy. It was the 300-pound guys that, 315 that got free up the middle that he was struggling with. I think interior pressure and interior pass rush is, to me, more valuable than off the edge. Personally. Now, both DQ and Joe Witt downplayed that. Like, you need it from, and they're not wrong. You need it from both. But we don't get enough of it inside. So I think the interior pass rush needs to be better. But the question was, is it more important? And maybe the answer is no. I just think to what we need, because we don't have any elite edge rushers, I do think it's a bigger emphasis needs to be placed on guys inside winning. However that happens, whether you got to create and manufacture that with twists and stunts and things of that nature, you got to figure it out. But I do think there's a bigger emphasis needs to be placed on interior pass rush, which is why I'm excited that as we speak right now, contract year Daron Payne is loading. I just checked. It's at 47%. So then Joe Witt Jr. talked about first and second down versus third downs, because he was asked about Frankie Louvu's role and if he's going to have to be featured more as a pass rusher because of no Dante Fowler Jr., because of the lack of perceived pass rush that we have. And he said, look, Frankie's role really isn't going to change all that much because we feel like we have so much more versatility on first and second downs, which we lacked last year because we didn't have the depth last year, right? We didn't have the depth. You were putting Carl Davis and Cleveland Farrell and, and I thought he played well for us, but Sheldon Day was overmatched, right? You were putting guys out there that were overmatched last season, especially when teams decided they wanted to run the football. Well, he said, now we got Javon Kinlaw. We got Eddie Goldman. We got Dietrich Wise. We got guys that we can rotate in there that we feel good about on first and second down. All that running shit the teams was trying to do to us last year, they shouldn't be able to do that to us this year. Because we added guys up front that we feel really good about. But as far as third down is concerned, Frankie's still going to be Frankie on third down. So he's like, Frankie's role really ain't going to change. But I thought he specifically went out of his way to talk about the additions up front as guys that are going to be pivotal on first and second down, meaning rundowns. He said in obvious passing situations, that's when you're going to turn a guy like Frankie loose. And then he finished up the press conference with a great Quan Martin story. So much like Daron Payne, Joe Witt Jr. was singing the praises of Quan Martin and him being locked in this offseason. He said, now, Quan hasn't been on the field due to those surgeries that we talked about on the shoulder. But he said from a mental standpoint, Quan has been locked in. And he told the story of Quan Martin last year, how when he first got here, he told the staff, sit his ass down, which meant take Quan and move him from the first unit to the second, because I don't got time for this shit. He said, and they teased Joe Witt Jr. about that decision. They said, hey, how'd that decision work out for you? Right. And so he laughed about that, but he said he gave a lot of credit to Jason Simmons and I always forget the defensive backs coach's name. Always. I always remember Jason Simmons' name, and he's an assistant and the pass game coordinator, defensive pass game coordinator, and I always forget the defensive backs coach's name that we got from the Chargers. But he credited those two in particular with really getting Quan Martin's confidence back up and getting him in the right frame of mind. Because Joe Witt said after he got benched and sent that and demoted to the second unit, the next 3 practices, Quan was on it. And they didn't have any setbacks from him moving forward. He said he was making too many mental mistakes, too many missed assignments, and he just couldn't have that. And Joe Witt is hard on those defensive backs. Why? He's a defensive backs coach at heart. That's how he cut his teeth in this league. Joe Witt Jr. has always been a guy that's been hands-on with defensive backs. So he ain't for the bullshit with the defensive backs. So when he praises, which he did today, Trey Amos, you know that young fella is coming out there and he's showing well early on in this camp in OTAs, because he ain't going to be just throwing out praises to dudes in the secondary because that's his baby. It's a lot like Nick Saban. If Nick Saban, who said of Mikey Sanders still in the draft last year, pound for pound, he's the best player in the draft, that's high praises from a guy in Nick Saban who at his core is a defensive backs guy. So when dudes like that speak, I listen, because that shit means something to them, man. It means something to me, man. Because it hits different. That kind of praise from a dude that's going to be extremely hard on that particular position. You got to know, Joe Witt won't effing around. Like, he making too many mistakes. I can't deal with this type of incompetence. But after that, Quan got his shit together. So that was a pretty cool story of Quan Martin. Remember, fans shitted on Quan Martin in his rookie season. You know, had the man in a preseason game. Shame on y'all. Force this man to take his social media down. Y'all were shitting on him so bad. He's dealt with some adversity here. And this group came in here and they weren't sold on Quan Martin initially. And he fought through that adversity to get to where he is now. And Quan Martin has a chance. And he said, I'm hard on Quan Martin because I think he can be one of the best safeties in the NFL. And I coach him as such. That's high praise coming from Joe Witt Jr. Again, keep in mind what his background is. And when he says something like that, why he's saying that. That's high praise coming from Joe Witt Jr. So you see how they feel about Quan Martin. So I digress. Let's get to the comment section and we'll get out of here. We got one comment and we'll get out of here. That was Joe Witt Jr. Thought he was excellent today. JLG, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you for being a member of the MOBB, who writes, what it do, Lou? What's going on, JLG? Lou, you've been talking about sacks a lot lately. Pause. However, do you think sacks are an overrated stat? No, I don't. I think pressure is probably a more indicative stat of what you're looking for as a fan base, but you can get, I mean, we've had some of the best pressure masters in the business here in Washington over the years, and that ain't equate to shit. How many times did Preston Smith be among the leaders in the league in pressure rate when he was here in Washington, and it didn't amount to anything? Montez Sweat, another guy that was a pressure rate monster. So you love pressure because sometimes it can force to ill-advised throws and decisions. It could force a throwaway on a third down, and now they got a punt. Pressure is great. That's what you want. But you know what's even better than pressure? A sack. That means the quarterback didn't get rid of the football at all, because anything could happen. If he throws it, it could end up being a good thing for you, where it gets tipped in the air, picked off. He can make a poor decision like Jared Goff did in the NFC divisional round, and it gets picked off and brought back for a touchdown. Anything could happen. Or they could complete a pass and get a first down. Jaden Daniels was under immense pressure in week 3 against Cincinnati. What did he do on that play to Terry McLaurin? Delivered one of the greatest footballs these eyes have ever seen, staring down the gun barrel of a blitz. That was pressure, but it didn't amount to anything good for the defense. Sacks, to me, represent they didn't even get a chance to throw the football. Pressure is great, and that's one of those stats that I think goes hand in hand with sacks. And we talk about getting to the quarterback a lot, but what a sack actually represents on the quarterback is a lack. Like, I talk about this if we're using a basketball analogy. I talk about playoff basketball and how it's important that you cherish every possession. That's why I love playoff basketball, because having 17 turnovers in a regular season game is cool. Nobody even bats an eye. Okay, you got to clean up turnovers. You have 17 turnovers in a playoff game, you will not win. because valuing every position, get the ball up on the backboard. Just get it up there, because who knows? You might get an offensive rebound, you may get a tip out, then get an open three, right? Just get the shit up on the backboard. But when you turn it over, live ball turnovers in the NBA kill you more than, dead ball turnovers. But still, turnovers is turnover. You didn't get a shot off. That's why I know my Memphis Grizzlies will never win shit, because we turn the ball over too much. We don't value the basketball. I liken getting a sack on a quarterback to be the same thing. They didn't even get an opportunity to throw the football. They didn't even get an attempt up. That's a missed opportunity, because you got to the quarterback before he could. So I put a lot of emphasis on sacks, because some of the best defenses in the league, can you tell me who led the NFL in sacks last year? Can you tell me? JLG. Just put it in the comment section. I'm looking at the comments right now. I see y'all killing me in the comment section. I am going to be less conscious of my words. I'm going to just say what I want to say. I'm going to mess up anyway. There's no way around this. I've been talking like this my whole life. I'm not going to be able to change. So y'all just going to have to keep killing me. When it's super overt and I can hear it, I'll try to correct it. But I'm going to just be me. Y'all just going to have to kill me, bro. I'm dead. I'm a dead man walking. All right. One person has the right team here. Jeremiah says the Eagles, we had more sacks last season than the Eagles did. You trying to tell me our defense is better than the Eagles defense? No, right? So it's not all about sacks, but they have a guy who doesn't get sacks really on their defensive line. You may have heard of him. His name's Jalen Carter. He's really good. He produces a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure. We saw it in the Super Bowl. Now, they got to Patrick Mahomes. But even when they didn't, they were so disruptive. You know who led the league in sacks last year? And it was by a wide margin. The Denver Broncos. 63 sacks. The next closest team had 54 sacks. They led the league by 9 sacks. You know who's one of the better defenses in football? Again, the Denver Broncos. They lost a lot of games because either the offense wasn't good enough. They had some ridiculous defensive showings last year. They lost a game to Pittsburgh. I think the score was 13-6. They gave up 13 points and lost a game because their offense couldn't score. And there were plenty of games like that last year for them. They lost a game in Arrowhead where they dominated to a walk-off field goal. All kinds of nonsense happened in that game. I think the Chiefs might have scored 18 points and beat them. Like, that's the type of time they were on. They went to Tampa Bay when the Buccaneers, I think, were 2-0, riding high. They were 0-2 at the time. They went there and they shut down that high-powered Bucs offense. Yeah, you know the one that, like, had the most passing yards in the NFL last year? That one? And I think they held them to 7 points. That Broncos defense was legit. And part of the reason why is because they could get to your damn quarterback. So I put a lot on sacks. I put a lot of emphasis on getting to the quarterback. But when it's all said and done, pressure might be more important, but pressure is only as good as what you got going on the back end. If your secondary isn't covering, then that pressure that you get on the quarterback is cool, but they're still going to complete a pass, and there still could be a big play that can be had. If you get a sack on a quarterback, it don't matter what. You could have blown coverage. Doesn't matter. Quarterback never got a chance to throw the football. Yeah, I said that, Kelvin. And when I said it, I was like, they probably gonna kill me for that one too. I'm not even gonna try to change it up no more. Because the more I try to change, the worse it gets. The worse it gets. Oh man. Y'all just gonna have to kill me, bro. I'm too check this one out. I'm too deep in the game. Anyway, I digress. So that's OTAs phase 3. Next time we talk, it'll be putting a bow on this phase and what we should start looking forward to in phase. That'll be all of the phases. Then we'll be going into mandatory mini camps. That's a whole different animal. So, but we'll tackle that when we get there. A side note, I think the Commanders Kings we may be pushing our show. I've been getting text messages all throughout the show today. We may be pushing it to Thursday. I'm going to talk to them and see what's what. One of them says that their schedule is going to be better suited for Thursday, which is fine by me. But I also know the NBA Finals is Thursday. I was trying to kind of keep that day free just so we wouldn't be up against the NBA Finals. So I'll talk to him and see. It still might be tonight, but it may be tomorrow night. So I'll keep you abreast of that situation. But whatever the case may be, that's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on this installment of the Command Post Live. You know what it is. Post up, take command. You guys have a good one. Take care. And I will see you next time. Peace.